In the late 1940s, a Russian researcher enters a room where he expects to see his human test subjects alive and well. Instead, he witnesses absolute pandemonium. He hears the scream of the damned, and in front of him is a body that has been torn apart and eviscerated. It looks like the devil himself has been in the room. Even survivors have had chunks of flesh ripped from their arms and legs. The ends of their fingers show exposed bone. Their faces are sheared of skin. This nightmare scenario isn't a plot from a horror movie, but straight out of the famous Russian sleep experiment. Let's start from the beginning, and then we'll uncover if this eerie tale is a horrifying reality or just a myth. The truth might be scarier than the story itself. Set in the late 1940s, a time when World War II had just ended and the Cold War was beginning, the experiment took place during a period of intense secrecy and experimentation. Many nations, including Russia, subjected prisoners to harsh conditions and experimental procedures. For example, during World War II, Japan conducted inhumane experiments on prisoners of war through Unit 731, which involved biological warfare and chemical agents. In this context, Russian scientists devised an experiment that would become known as the Russian sleep experiment. Before we delve into the details of this experiment, it's important to understand why it was conducted. Any war cannot be won just by brute force. It also involves deception, strategy, and numerous experiments. The Russian sleep experiment aimed to create a superhuman who would be devoid of pain and emotions and could eliminate enemies on command without question. 5 political prisoners, deemed expendable by the Soviet government, were selected for the study. They were promised that they would be released after 1 month if they could stay awake during this period. These prisoners were confined in a hermetically sealed chamber designed to be completely isolated from the outside world and equipped with microphones and cameras to allow the researchers to monitor every aspect of the prisoner's behavior and physiological state. The conditions inside the chamber were meticulously controlled to ensure that the prisoners would remain awake. While the prisoners were provided with sufficient food and water, all means of sleep were removed, including bedding and any items that could aid in rest. Initially, the prisoners resisted the temptation to sleep, engaging in conversations and attempting to keep themselves occupied. However, as the days progressed, the effects of sleep deprivation began to take a toll. The prisoners started to exhibit signs of extreme psychological distress, including severe paranoia, hallucinations, and erratic behavior. By the 5th day, the scientists noticed that the prisoners' morale was deteriorating rapidly, and they have appeared pale and depressed. They stopped talking to each other and began alternately whispering to the microphones and one-way mirrored portholes. On the 9th day, one prisoner started screaming. He ran the length of the chamber repeatedly, yelling at the top of his lungs for 3 hours straight. Later, he continued attempting to scream, but was only able to produce occasional squeaks. The most surprising thing about this behavior, the other captives didn't even react to it. They continued whispering to the microphones until the second of the captives started to scream. The other prisoners tore apart books, smeared page after page with their own feces, and pasted them calmly over the glass portholes. The screaming eventually ceased, and so did the whispering. A sinister twist in the story reveals that scientists were releasing a toxic gas into the chamber, albeit at a reduced concentration, to avoid immediate death, but still causing harm. After 3 more days passed, the researchers checked microphones hourly to make sure they were working, since they thought it was impossible that no sound could be coming with 5 people inside. The oxygen consumption in the chamber indicated that all 5 must still be alive. In fact, It was the amount of oxygen 5 people would consume at a very heavy level of strenuous exercise. As the researchers couldn't see or hear anything from the chamber, fearing the captives are dead. On the 14th day, they used the intercom inside the chamber, hoping to provoke any response from the captives. They announced, "We are opening the chamber to test the microphones. Step away from the door and lie flat on the floor, or you will be shot. Compliance will earn one of you your immediate freedom." To their surprise, they heard a single phrase in a calm voice response: "We no longer want to be freed." The chamber was flushed of the stimulant gas and filled with fresh air, and immediately voices from the microphones began to object. The voices began begging for the gas to be turned on. The chamber was opened and soldiers were sent in to retrieve the test subjects. The captives began to scream louder than ever, and so did the soldiers when they saw what was inside. 4 of the 5 subjects were still alive, though their conditions were far from what one might call living. Food rations past day 5 had been untouched. Chunks of flesh from a deceased subject were found stuffed into the chamber's drain. The surviving prisoners had large portions of muscle and skin torn from their bodies. The destruction of flesh and exposed bone on their fingertips indicated that these wounds were self-inflicted by their bare hands. The abdominal organs of all 4 survivors had been removed, while the heart, lungs, and diaphragm remained in place. The skin and most of the muscles attached to the ribs had been ripped off, exposing the lungs through the rib cage. All the blood vessels and organs remained intact. They had just been taken out and laid on the floor, fanning out around the eviscerated but still living bodies of the subjects. The digestive tract of all 4 could be seen working, digesting food. It became apparent that what they were digesting was their own flesh that they had ripped off and eaten over the course of days. The captives continued to scream to be left in the chamber and alternately begged and demanded that the gas be turned back on lest they fall asleep. To everyone's surprise, the test subjects put up a fierce fight in the process of being removed from the chamber. One of the Russian soldiers died from having his throat ripped out. Another was gravely injured by having his testicles ripped off and an artery in his leg severed by one of the subject's teeth. In the struggle, one of the 4 living subjects had his spleen ruptured and he bled out almost immediately. The medical researchers attempted to sedate him, but this proved impossible. He was injected with more than 10 times the human dose of a morphine derivative and still fought like a cornered animal, breaking the ribs and arm of one doctor. His heart was seen to beat for a full 2 minutes after he had bled out to the point there was more air in his vascular system than blood. Even after his heart stopped, he continued to scream and flail for another 3 minutes, struggling to attack anyone in reach and just repeating the word "more" over and over, until he finally fell silent. The surviving 3 test subjects were heavily restrained and moved to a medical facility. The 2 with intact vocal cords continuously begged for the gas, demanding to be kept awake. The most injured of the 3 was taken to the only surgical operating room that the facility had. In the process of preparing the subject to have his organs placed back within his body, it was found that he was effectively immune to the sedative they had given him to prepare him for the surgery. He fought furiously against his restraints when the anesthetic gas was brought out to put him under. He managed to tear most of the way through a 4-inch wide leather strap on one wrist, even though the weight of a 200-pound soldier was holding that wrist as well. It took only a little more anesthetic than normal to put him under, and the instant his eyelids fluttered and closed, his heart stopped. In the autopsy of the test subject that died on the operating table, it was found that his blood had tripled the normal level of oxygen. His muscles that were still attached to his skeleton were badly torn, and he had broken 9 bones in his struggle to not be subdued. Most of them were from the force his own muscles had exerted on them. The second survivor, the first to start screaming, had shredded his vocal cords, leaving him unable to beg or protest. When the anesthetic gas was brought near, he could only shake his head violently in refusal. But when someone hesitantly suggested performing the surgery without anesthesia, he nodded in agreement. For the entire 6-hour procedure, during which his abdominal organs were put back in place and his remaining skin was stretched to cover them, he didn't react at all. The presiding surgeon repeatedly insisted that it should be medically impossible for the patient to still be alive. One terrified nurse assisting with the surgery claimed she saw the patient's mouth curl into a smile whenever his eyes met hers. When the surgery finally ended, the subject wheezed loudly, struggling to speak. Believing he had something crucial to convey, the surgeon hurriedly fetched a pen and pad. The patient's message was chillingly simple: keep cutting. The remaining 2 test subjects underwent the same surgery, both without anesthesia. Despite being injected with a paralytic, the procedure was nearly impossible to perform as the patients laughed uncontrollably throughout. Once the paralytic took effect, they could only follow the researchers with their eyes. Strangely, the drug wore off much faster than expected, and they soon began struggling to break free from their restraints. As soon as they could speak, they demanded the stimulant gas once more. When the researchers asked why they had mutilated themselves, why they had torn out their own organs, and why they still wanted the gas, the subjects had only one chilling answer: I must remain awake. All 3 subjects had their restraints reinforced and were placed back into the chamber, awaiting a decision on their fate. The researchers, under pressure from their military superiors for failing the experiment's objectives, considered euthanizing the survivors. However, the commanding officer, a former KGB agent, saw potential in continuing the experiment and insisted on putting them back on the gas. Despite strong objections from the researchers, the order was given. To everyone's shock, the moment they realized they were going back on the gas, all 3 subjects stopped struggling. It was clear that by now, each of them was battling desperately to stay awake. One of the subjects, who could still speak, began humming loudly and continuously. The mute subject strained his legs against the leather bonds with all his might, shifting them left and right as if trying to focus on something. The last subject held his head off the pillow, blinking rapidly. As the first subject was wired for the EEG, the researchers monitored his brainwaves in disbelief. Most of the time, they appeared normal, but occasionally, they would flatline inexplicably, as if he were repeatedly slipping into brain death before returning to life. As the researchers focused on the paper scrolling out of the brainwave monitor, only one nurse noticed the first subject's eyes slip shut just as his head hit the pillow. His brainwaves instantly shifted to the pattern of deep sleep, then flatlined completely as his heart stopped in unison. The last subject, who could still speak, began screaming, demanding to be sealed back in the chamber immediately. His brainwaves mirrored those of the subject who had just died after falling asleep. In response, the commander ordered the chamber to be sealed with both remaining subjects inside, along with 3 researchers. But before the order could be carried out, one of the assigned researchers pulled out his gun, shot the commander point blank between the eyes, and then turned the weapon on the mute subject, killing him instantly. With the gun still in hand, he aimed it at the last surviving subject, who was still strapped to the bed while the rest of the medical and research team fled the room in terror. "I won't be locked in here with these things, not with you!" he shouted at the man restrained on the table. "What are you?" he demanded, his voice trembling. "I must know." The subject smiled faintly. "Have you forgotten so easily?" he asked, his voice eerily calm. "We are you. We are the madness that lurks within you all, begging to be free in the darkest corners of your mind. We are what you hide from under the covers every night. We are what you sedate into silence when you drift off to that place where we cannot follow." The researcher froze, gripped by a chilling realization. Then, with trembling hands, he aimed the gun at the subject's heart and pulled the trigger. As the bullet struck, the EEG flatlined, and the subject, choking on his final breath, whispered, "So, nearly free." Some believe that after this experiment, the scientists and general also killed themselves because they could not bear the cruelty. Others believe that all records of the experiment were destroyed to keep it from the world. So, you may have understood that the Russian sleep experiment was conducted, but the biggest question is whether it actually happened or if it is just an invented story. While the Russian sleep experiment is widely recognized as an urban legend, certain unsettling details make it eerily plausible. The story is set in the late 1940s, a time when the Soviet Union was deeply involved in secretive research and brutal experimentation. The USSR, like other regimes during that era, was known for conducting harsh and unethical experiments on humans, especially prisoners and dissidents. Historical cases such as the Nazi medical experiments and Japan's Unit 731 during World War II involved extreme and inhumane practices on prisoners. The Soviet Union, with its notorious gulags and secret experiments, could have potentially conducted something similarly horrific. Real-life experiments like Randy Gardner's 11-day sleep deprivation study have shown that prolonged wakefulness can lead to severe hallucinations, paranoia, and cognitive breakdowns. The Russian sleep experiment's depiction of subjects descending into madness aligns with what we know about the effects of extreme sleep deprivation. Governments and military organizations have a long history of covering up unethical experiments. The CIA's MK-Ultra program, which involved mind control experiments, only came to light through declassified documents and public outcry. This parallel strengthens the notion that if the Russian sleep experiment did occur, all evidence of it might have been destroyed to keep the truth buried. So what do you think? Could there be a dark truth behind this chilling story? Dive deeper, share your thoughts in the comments, and if you're intrigued by mysteries like this, don't forget to subscribe and hit the notification bell for more content that explores the line between fact and fiction.